Hello, this is the European history lesson for Monday, the 26th of October 2020. This is period one, although it'll apply to all of you. And the question is from Friday: what would you do if something that you loved, an institution that you loved, turned out to be corrupt? Would you A, say, my church, love it or leave it? B, say, I'm going to reform from within? C, say, burn it down, it's corrupt, start over? Or D, do something that I didn't predict? I'll start with volunteers, if any, and we'll go into the dice. Yes, sir.
If
Your
it's
symptoms.
if it's something that you have like you have a higher power in it, like you're more up top on the chain of that institution, then I would try to use that power to tell people that it is corrupt.
What if it takes time to get there? Are you willing to be a part of an institution that has corruption in it in order to reform it from within, which
Well,
can take decades?
yeah, if you were just like if Catholic faith now that I'm a part of, was, I found out was super corrupt.
Yeah.
I would now leave that faith instead of actually trying.
Okay. Why the difference? Why does your position or your power to you make a difference in that calculation?
Because if you actually have power already, then it would make sense to use that power for good to tell other people about the corruption.
Okay, so you're basing part of your calculus on whether or not you would be able to succeed, not on. Okay, that's a pragmatic thing. Lee, you had your hand up.
Okay, so when like you said something.
Oh
about,
wait,
like,
I'm sorry, Eugene. Did you have your hand up too?
yeah. Well,
I'm gonna go down.
okay.
Bing bang boom. Sorry, Lee.
um,
It's the damn masks. Go.
I think I think it would be easier to convince people to leave the faith than to convince the faith to just change itself.
That's an interesting point. Why would it be easier to convince people to leave than to convince something that exists to alter its character?
Because it's already got structure and it already has like a set way of being, and people are already like very strongly.
So you'd rather build a new structure entirely than try to take apart an old one and re-engineer it.
Yeah.
Okay. Lee, thank you for waiting.
Honestly, when you said like something that I'm like, oh golly, I sure do love this organization. I honestly just thought Wikipedia, and I'm like, imagine if Wikipedia was corrupt. I'm like, I would try to correct like all the things that got wrong. But then
Okay.
if that just didn't work, I'd probably do what Eugene did and like try to convince people like, you know what, Wikipedia kind of sucks now. We should go use YouTube.com.
Britannica.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, there's like some other things, and like for me, oh,
No.
okay, so you know Pokemon and stuff. I like Pokemon, but then
But what about Yu-Gi-Oh? Isn't Yu-Gi-Oh better?
No, I'm talking about the video game,
Oh,
not the
fine.
card game.
Okay.
Yu-Gi-Oh video games kind of stink. But anyway, the new Pokemon games, I don't like them. I just realized that, okay, besides Sun and Moon, I don't like any of the newer games. And I sit down and I'm like, should I try to go and reform the Pokemon company? No, that's a lot of work. And I don't really want to work at Pokemon.
Okay. So thank you for bringing Wikipedia and Pokemon into this. That's not where I expected this to go. So hoorah. Yes, and then yes.
I think a lot of it has to do with time and how much you're willing to spend trying to correct these issues, because with like sort of what Eugene was saying, it's kind of like if it is an older institution and it's been going on for a long time, it's sort of like teaching an old dog new tricks. It's going to take a lot longer than, if they're a new little puppy and they're just being taught.
You're right, but I'm going to throw a monkey wrench that I didn't throw at Eugene. Because he initiated it and you built upon it. The monkey wrench is this, and I'm going to give you an analogy. Let's say a few days from now we have a contested election, and neither side is willing to give in. Biden says, "Oh, we got to count all the votes in Democrat counties," and Trump says, "Well, we got to count all the votes in Republican counties," and neither of them are reasonable, and this goes on month after month, and leads to an actual armed conflict, civil war, which I hope doesn't happen, which I hope is far-fetched. Were that to happen, would it matter which side seemed to have legitimacy? In other words, which side seemed to be the closest to actually having won the election? Would it matter for one side to say, well, we're the legitimate government, they're rebels? Or are both sides equally messed up?
Well, I mean, I think at that point it would be, people have their own opinions, so they're just going to join whichever side they want to be on, and it wouldn't really matter the time or who declared what, because it would be, they would have, their faith would lie in that.
So within the country, it wouldn't matter much. What about outside, in terms of foreign relations, allies, enemies, that sort of thing?
I think then it would probably matter more to them because they don't have any personal investment. They're just trying to.
So whoever could create the air of legitimacy, the veneer of respectability, might have an edge in terms of foreign affairs. I agree. And I also agree on the domestic side, which is sad. The same thing could happen here. The old institution has the veneer of respectability. It has the aura of legitimacy because it's been around. By surviving generation upon generation, it has earned a certain degree of trust and respect and authority. And by stepping away from that, you're giving that up. And you're asking people to join something untried and brand new. And some people might be willing to do that, and some people won't. Bear this in mind, by the way, in regards to religion. When they wrote the King James version of the Holy Bible, in other words, when they translated it into that version of English, they intentionally wrote it archaically. Lots of these and thous. People in the early 1600s didn't exactly speak like that. To them, it seemed old-fashioned. And to the writers of the Bible, that seemed to lend it an air of legitimate authority because it was old. And because in most societies, if you're old, you've proven you can survive and you've earned a certain degree of that. But just for your consideration, there is no right answer here. It's a question of what you would do. Yes.
Okay, so far we have Pokemon, Wikipedia, Yu-Gi-Oh. I'm gonna add Michael Jackson.
That's a good one.
So people liked his music, but then they figured
Not
out
me. Never liked his music. But go on.
lots of people did.
Yes.
And then they figured out he was a pedophile.
Yes.
That wouldn't have been a problem if his music was bad.
No, because then they would have said pedophile.
Exactly. So no one would freak out if the organization didn't have something good to offer.
Excellent. True. And this is the problem. Does anyone else have anything? Yeah.
I think on the flip side, if you reform the institution, it gets a more complete result rather than just breaking everything apart and then you get fractured.
If you're able to preserve the aura of legitimacy and the unity and all that. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess to add on to my answer, what I would do if I was a part of an organization would
Call yourself Larton Muther. Yes.
Okay. I would keep the same morals because obviously there's something there, but I wouldn't associate myself with the people that are corrupt.
Okay. The reason this matters is you're going to find that which you believe in has feet of clay. There isn't a politician out there, no matter how much you admire them, that's a paragon of virtue. I'm not saying they're all corrupt. I don't believe they're all corrupt. I believe that many politicians go into the job because they want to make the world a better place. And this is true of conservatives and liberals. I believe that, absolutely. I do also believe that many people become corrupted as the power and the opportunities for taking and accepting bribes and favors changes them. And I think that corruption matters. There were people back in the 90s that said, I don't care if Bill Clinton cheated on his wife, which he manifestly did. It's what he does in public. And what that did is it completely ignored the fact that the man made an oath, for better or worse, to Hillary Rodham. And this is one of the most intimate oaths a man can make. And he had no problem violating that oath. And he's going to be your president taking an oath. I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear to preserve and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. If he breaks one oath, is he not more likely to break another oath? You're going to find, as I have found, that every human institution is tainted, without exception. And when you discover that that includes that which you deeply trust and admire, it's a hard day. Not because I have told you or somebody from outside of your skull has told you that it's corrupt. It's because you have found something bad yourself that bothers you. And at that point, you have to decide what you're going to do about it. And this is where the temptation to ignore things comes in. Human beings have an almost endless capacity for self-delusion. And this allows them to ignore obvious problems because they're very, very difficult to accept. The example I classically give is a husband gets a promotion at work, takes the rest of the day off, comes home, and finds his wife in flagrante delicto with the pool boy. And the pool boy dives out the bedroom window, and he's gone. And the husband goes into the living room, and he doesn't know what to do. And the wife comes out, and she says, "But honey, it's not what you thought. We were, he lost his car keys. They ended up flying into the bedroom window. So we went looking for them, and we got into a tickle fight. I know it looks bad. I know we're naked, but it was a tickle fight. It was innocent. Honey, who are you going to believe, me or your eyes?" That's the implicit threat and message. And if you believe your eyes, your life changes. Right then, boom, gone. Marriage is over, or the marriage at least needs serious work. That means you've got to reconsider where you live, what your finances are, who's going to get the kids, if there are kids involved, all this horrible stuff. Or you can accept the lie that they were just having an innocent tickle fight and everything will be fine. Oh, and she'll let you win a bunch of fights for the next year or two because you've got something on her. What are you going to do? I wouldn't use this example if a lot of people didn't accept the horrible, corrupt lie. Oh, of course I believe you, honey, not my eyes. Because believing my eyes would have too steep a price. People don't want to see evil. That's why a lot of people deny the existence of evil. Oh, there's no good, there's no evil, it's all just opinion. Baloney. When you encounter real evil, you'll know it. And then the question is, what do you do about it? Do you engage in some sophistry to make believe it's not evil? Or do you accept that, oh my God, this is evil and here I am, I know about it, what do I do? That is the position Luther found himself in. And that's the position others found themselves in. It's not that the church was evil. It's that there was evil within the church. I hope you see the difference. So what do you do about that? Well, this is what Luther didn't do. Luther didn't say, my church, love it or leave it. He didn't say, yeah, it's got corruption, but it's not defined by that corruption. In fact, the church does so much good that whatever evil we've done washes out. We can deal with that in-house without embarrassing ourselves in public. He didn't take that answer. And that's not, by the way, a bad answer. That's usually my answer when it comes to my country. I am more aware of you than you are at this point in your lives about the sins of the United States of America. I know that we have, at one time under President Jackson, engaged in biological warfare, intentional and purposeful biological warfare against the Indians. I know about the massacre at Wounded Knee. I know about a bunch of things. And those things are undeniable and they're true, but they're not what defines us, not to me. They are our worst, not our best impulses. They are not typical. That's what I believe. And whether or not you personally think anything of me, that doesn't matter. There are plenty of people who, when they find fault with their beloved institution, will say, okay, it's real. They're not denying it. They're not saying the evil doesn't exist. They're saying the evil is not definitive. The evil is an aberration instead. And as an aberration, as something that's atypical, and there, despite the institution's goodness, the institution will eventually reject it. And I will help the institution reject it. but I'm not going to go around wearing a flagellant's whip, beating myself, saying mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, because the institution does better work than that. Now, that isn't what Luther did. That is what many other Catholics did do, and they had a good reason for it, because the church did have a lot of good, and the church did do a lot of necessary work. And remember, the church is not what it is today. What a lot of religious faith is today is purely discretionary, especially here in the United States. We have Christians dying for their faith in Syria and Iraq. These are Nestorian Christians of the Asian branch of Christianity that broke off before Constantine. And they have been systematically massacred under the ISIS regime and by other Islamist groups who want to make that region of the world purely Islamic. These are the same people that want to drive the Jews into the sea in Israel or kill them all. But that's not all. Christians are dying in the Philippines because of the Moro, the Muslims who live in the southern Philippine island of Mindanao. They don't want Christians infiltrating what they consider to be Islamic territory. But that's not all. The Chinese Communist Party has been bulldozing unofficial churches for decades and is engaged in the most systematic persecution of Christians since the Emperor Diocletian before Constantine. But in the United States, we have a bunch of people who call themselves Christians who don't go to church. I'm one of them. Who don't read the Bible, who don't let it affect their business practices, who don't let it affect their personal lives. It's just like, oh, I'm a Red Sox fan. Oh, I'm a Yankee fan. Oh, I'm a Seahawks fan. Oh, I'm a Christian. It's a discretionary minor part of their lives. The church at this time was everything. It was everywhere. It was ubiquitous. God and his church are at the center of all things. So this mattered. The risk of that is self-delusion. The risk of that first response is saying, yeah, my church, love it or leave it. There's evil, but it doesn't define us. And then ignoring the evil for the rest of your natural life. The risk is of becoming an apologist for corruption. The risk is in accepting that there was evil and then ignoring it. You're in fact conspiring to help it. Because a refusal to act against evil is assenting to it. Silence is assent in a case like that. Or as Edmund Burke famously said, this is the 18th century British politician, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing, which I think is absolutely true. So the risk in saying my church, love it or leave it, is that you do nothing. So the second option, the option that I know it, and then I put Sam Cudmore in your place because of the C name, Bolton Simpkins. There we go. Now you get to see how I file people's names in my head. What Mr. Simpkins said was, if I had power, I'd work from within. But that's begging the question a little bit, because Luther didn't have power at first. Luther didn't want power. He at first just wanted to lead a good life within a monastery, and then he found their corruption. And then what does he do about it? He starts speaking about it, trying to reform the church. The church starts punishing him for it, so he gets more angry, and things go from there. To assume that you have power assumes that there is a practical dimension to this, which is a moral question. The moral question is, when you encounter evil that you identify in your conscience as evil, what do you do about it? Working to reform the system from within prioritizes the evil. It says that whatever good we do as an institution is tainted by that corruption and is tainted by that evil and is therefore not really as good as it might be. It's corrupt. It's blighted. It's false. The ends don't justify the means. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double down on my loyalty. I'm going to engage more fully so that I earn responsible positions. And I'm going to call out the evil wherever I find it, within the institution, and if necessary, outside the institution, to ask for the help of everyday people in reforming this institution that we all share. And to make that work, and the reason that I'm taking issue with your point is that takes a patience of decades, because it's going to take you decades to get anywhere near an influential position. What you're gambling on, though, if you do that, if you take the reform from within model, what's the risk? What's the risk?
The institution taking away that power that you had?
Well, the institution can take away the power if you irritate it too much. Yes, that's possible. But there's something even more fundamentally dangerous. Yeah?
You become associated with the evil that you're trying to stop or call out.
You have this in your head that you're fighting the evil. But it's a question, you've got a vat of water, and you've got a little bit of flavor. That little bit of flavor is you as a reformer. That vat of water is the institutional inertia of the bureaucracy of the organization. By joining yourself to the water, by dropping in the flavor, is the flavor going to transform the water into now something like juice or punch or something? Or is the water going to dilute you so much that you're effectively useless? And that's the risk. The risk is that you are one person in a massive institution, and all institutions, regardless of purpose, all institutions have bureaucratic inertia. They don't want to change. Once they establish ways of doing things, and you all pointed this out, they don't want to change. So fighting that inertia takes time. But there's also this. Corruption rarely comes in the form of a horned devil. Yes?
Oh, well, I was just going to say, there's also the risk of becoming corrupt by trying to stop the corruption. So because you're so small and because you're not necessarily, going to be heard just by yourself, you may easily be more susceptible to choose paths and do things that therefore make you more corrupt as a person in order to stop this corruption. So it's just a
Indeed.
spiral.
Indeed. When I think of what you said, is I think of labor unions in the 1930s. So you've got the Teamsters Union, which is a union of truckers. And they are trying to unionize all of the long-haul truckers in the country. And that works in a lot of cases because companies sometimes are weak and short-sighted, and they treat their drivers like garbage. But there are some companies who actually pay their workers well, and they give their workers good benefits, but what they expect in response is for them never to unionize. And so the union calls strikes on these companies. Then the companies bring in the Pinkertons. Pinkertons is a private security company that's been around since the mid-1800s, since the Civil War, at least. And the Pinkertons bust heads. What is the union going to do? Well, what the Teamsters did, what Jimmy Hoffa did, who was the leader of the Teamsters from the 30s to the 70s until he disappeared, is he engaged with organized crime. And gangsters were brought in to help run the union. And with gangsters coming in to help run the union, the gangsters were going to get to profit from the union, from its contacts, from its dues, from its money. But the gangsters were also going to fight the Pinkertons, which they did, and they outfought the Pinkertons. So now you have a national truckers union that is very powerful, because every company that wants long-haul trucking has to hire union workers. If not, bad things will happen. But you've done the deal with the devil. You've accepted the mafia into your operation. And it is extremely likely that Jimmy Hoffa irritated the mafia in the early 1970s and ended up being buried in the foundational cement of the Meadowlands sports arena. We don't know this. He just disappeared. Can you, in fact, be corrupted by good intention? Of course you can. It happens all the time. Look at history. Ardent idealists often do deals with the devil to cut corners and to succeed. And they say, oh, the ends justify the... No, the ends... Can you ever achieve a good end with evil means? And that's an interesting argument that we can have. That's an interesting discussion that we can have. But if you're talking about a church, which is even more holy supposed to be than a union, then yeah, using dark means to achieve your goals is a risk. Look, you can go in to try to change the institution, but the institution is much more likely to change you. That's the risk you run of joining the institution and trying to work from within. When corruption comes, it won't come big. It won't come in a Satan suit with a horned and forked tail and a pitchfork. It'll come with a simple moral compromise. All you have to do is accept something as true that's obviously, evidently false. And if you accept that and stand by it publicly, everything else follows. You get slowly corrupted over time. And this sort of corruption is a very patient thing. It doesn't need to hurry. Sooner or later, it'll have you if you're willing to make that first compromise. Yeah.
You can't cleanse an ideal, and that goes both ways. So, like, if you have multiple people and those people spread, word goes fast. And if you believe that, chances are other people will too.
Mm-hmm.
But also, on the other side, the church can't cleanse your ideals because it's a human construct and you have free will. But you can't cleanse the church's ideas in any way, shape, or form also.
Unless you actually engage in a spiritual victory by persuading people that certain practices are wrong. After the Council of Trent, the church does reform itself to a great degree. Not to the extent Protestants would like, certainly not to the extent Reformed Christians would like, but they do reform practices to an extent. But you're right. Ultimately, you can't persuade somebody of something against their will unless you brainwash them, which is scary because brainwashing works. It's a horrible truth. But if you do persuade enough people, and the thing is, if you don't listen to the corruption, you end up having what happened to the Catholic Church in Ireland just about 20 years ago happened. Ireland was like Poland, was one of the most Catholic countries in Europe, much more Catholic than Italy, in terms of devout Catholicism being a part of daily life. This was true in Poland, and that was strengthened by the communist oppression of Christian faith. But in Ireland, it was part of their national identity. I know this because I have relatives who live there. And then the church sex scandal came out. And it became apparent that for generations upon generations, church officials had protected pedophile priests. Today, the Irish have, in large numbers and in a way that I find shocking, abandoned the Catholic Church in a righteous rage over the church betraying them and betraying its own ideals. So if you don't allow yourself to be cleansed, you're running a risk of the natural consequences of corruption happening. And that is, if the truth gets out, things are going to change. The last choice is what Luther ended up choosing, which is to abandon it and say, we're going to start fresh and we're going to burn the old edifice down. And that answer produced 150 years of religious war. That answer produced a division in Christendom and in Europe that still exists today. Northern Europe becomes Lutheran or Reformed. Southern Europe tends to remain Roman Catholic. The border areas have a bit of a mixture. When you say that something that's august, that's venerable, that's authoritative by being so darn old, is deeply corrupt and needs to be replaced, what you are going to do, if you succeed, is have a chain reaction where everything that depends upon that institution crumbles also. Anyway, any other thoughts on this? The reason that I spent time on it Friday and today is because this is the human element. Every Christian, when they encountered the criticisms of the church that Luther and others made, had to make a choice. Every single one. And in my experience, this is a universal phenomenon. Sooner or later, something that you believe in will reveal its feet of clay. And when it does, you'll have a choice. And some of you will choose in a way that you'll be proud of. Some of you will choose in a way that you'll need to do for the sake of your sanity. Not everyone will choose to do, quote, the right thing, unquote, whatever that is. Okay. John Calvin is French. Very French name, John Calvin. And Calvin's notions went well beyond Luther. Calvin basically says that the morphing, the transmogrification that happened to Christianity when it joined with the power that was imperial Rome at the Council of Nicaea, and everything that follows is a corruption. The genuine Christianity is the Christianity of the early church, of the church that was persecuted by Rome, not the church that joined with and bolstered Rome. And that what happened in the Middle Ages was even more of a departure from scriptural Christianity. Calvin's great book was the Institutes of the Christian Religion. This is H1 in your notepad. The Institutes of the Christian Religion comprise his systematic critique of what the church had become. An organization that lent itself towards mysticism, towards magic, towards superstition, and away from Holy Scripture, and a purified Christianity that is reformed back to something Christ might have recognized. So Calvin says that Luther, by getting rid of the Pope, but by keeping the Catholic Mass in many respects, was a moderate. He was partial. He wasn't serious about taking the idea of reforming Christianity to its logical conclusion. He was afraid. Calvin laughed at the Church of England because the Church of England was more Roman Catholic in some ways than Catholics. They just got rid of the Pope and put the king in his place. Calvin said if you want to genuinely reform Christian practices, you have to reform everything. Now, Calvin leads to a number of modern churches, some of which exist around here. And full disclosure, my own Christianity is of a more Calvinist variety. One of the things that Calvin says that is always talked about in history class and usually talked about wrong is predestination. Predestination. Predestination is difficult to wrap your head around. What it says, basically, is that long before your grandparents even met, God knew whether you were going to be saved or damned. That God, for his purposes, chose to have many people who were born to be damned. Now, where does this come from? The way I explain it, for better or worse, is it comes from our understanding of time. Imagine that existence, as we understand it, is a tapestry on the wall, a fabric painting that is spread like these two boards. And we exist within the weave of time. For us, there is a past. For us, there is a future. We live in this ephemeral, tenuous, gossamer now that's very hard to get a hold of. That's why photographs are so exciting, because photographs freeze time in one moment. Grades do the same thing. They're a snapshot of how you're doing at a particular moment. But life isn't like that. Life is a progression. Life goes on and on. So for us, our perspective is one within time and space. And God makes us with free will. That's a basic Christian concept. So if we have free will, we can choose to accept God's salvation and lead a good and loving life, and maybe then be destined to heaven. Or we can choose to lead a nasty, selfish life, and then we end up in hell as a reward for our lousy choices. From our standpoint, we have free will. But Calvin insists that the only true standpoint is God's. And for God, God looks at all of creation, from the origins and the moment of creation to the end of the universe, at once. He sees the entire tapestry in one moment, in one glance. From his perspective, there is no past or future. It is now. So God knows, before you were born, whether you're going to be saved or damned. From his perspective, we are predestined. From our perspective, we have free will. And Calvin says that God's perspective must trump ours, must be the true one. But you end up with problems if you take this idea and double down on it further. Within our lives, as we try to build a new Reformed church, a new Reformed Christianity, we have to be able to get a sense of who is saved and who is damned, of who is predestined for heaven. And the term for that, somebody who is predestined for heaven, is the elect. The elect. The elect are predestined for heaven. So how can you tell if you're a member of the elect or if someone else is predestined for heaven? And this is where we get into logically and morally dicey ground. Well, why don't we assume, a group of people says, that any member of our church community in good standing is self-evidently part of the elect. Because we live the life. Because we follow the dictates of the church, and we obey the rules, and we do everything we're supposed to, as far as anyone knows. Therefore, presumably, we are the elect. But another basic doctrine of Christianity says that no human being is capable of leading a perfect, sinless life. We all are going to screw up in our minds, in our words, and in our deeds. So what about the failures of the elect? Well, here's a great heresy that comes from Calvin's notion of predestination, a false teaching. I am a member of the elect. I know it. I feel it in every fiber of my being. And because I'm a member of the elect, everything I do is in harmony with God's will. You may not have known it, but he was going to thwart God's will 15 years from now. So I saved everyone. I saved the world. Oh my God, he's the undead. He's still moving after I shot him. The zombie Macarena. Oh, that's horrible. They should make a movie. No, that's too scary. The idea of a human being saying, I know who's saved or damned, with certainty, is the mother of all theological screw-ups. Because we don't know. So a number of people who start out as Calvinists do end up with a variant of religious zealotry and fanaticism, which leads, among other things, to the Salem witch trials and other witch trials and other people being burned at the stake. Is there something up there that applies to this? Yes, there
I
is.
was just looking at the map.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, any questions or thoughts on predestination? Because the truth is, what I just said only scratches the surface, and I'm not satisfied with the explanation, but it's what I've got. So do you have any questions or thoughts on the idea of predestination? You need to understand that is associated with Calvin. Ms. Garkle.
So, is predestination still like a widely accepted idea, or was it more common?
Today's Wesleyans, Christians, Presbyterian Christians, Congregationalist Christians, Methodist Christians, they're all from the Calvinist tradition. And they all, to one extent or another, retain predestination as part of their credo. but very few of them do what the Puritans did back in the 1600s. Because, A, it's a prideful thing to say, I know who's saved or damned. B, it led to some pretty nasty events. So the modern churches will talk about it much more softly. And they will say, yes, from God's perspective, this is predestined. But we have an existential doubt. And that existential doubt is something we should darn well remember the next time we're going to say that another person is saved or damned. Even saying that we are saved or damned is dicey.
So
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So then, does this idea sort of like directly contradict things like indulgences and relics?
Yeah, because all of those are predicated on the notion that human choice and human works can earn your way to heaven. And Calvin agreed with Luther on this point. He said that salvation is not something that you earn. Salvation is something that you're given as a gift by God freely. You undeserving sinner. I undeserving sinner. And what we have to do is be thankful and loving and grateful with the rest of our lives. In doing so, we'll probably do good works, but it's not to earn our way to heaven. You can't do that. So yes, there is an opposite notion in predestination to that whole idea of sanctification through works. Yes?
Did they also believe in a predestined time for purgatory?
I don't know if Calvin even acknowledged purgatory as an idea. I tend to think that Calvin thought that purgatory was a medieval idea that had crept in, a superstitious idea. Calvin probably, and I'm pretty sure of this, would have said that if I'm wrong, come in and prove me wrong, you'll earn a mighty extra credit. That purgatory, why do you need that? The whole purpose of this life is to make good choices. If you make good choices in it, you should go to heaven. If you don't make good choices in it, you'll go to the other place. But that's in God's hands and that's in your hands. The idea of purgatory as a second chance sort of begs the question, and it de-emphasizes the importance of choices in this life. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So, Calvin is given control of the Swiss city of Geneva. And like all of these little theocracies that are built, it becomes a hellscape, a nightmare. Because Calvin basically says the purpose of society is to strengthen the faithful. So instead of stepping back and letting people make choices, the government enforced religious dictates and religious laws. If you didn't go to church on Sunday, you were probably going to end up in the stocks. If you cursed in public, you were probably going to end up in the stocks. The stocks are like, they're basically 2 blocks of wood that can be locked together with 3 holes, a big hole and 2 little holes. You stick your head in the big hole, your wrists in the little holes, it's closed, and anyone who goes through town square sees you. Your crime is listed somewhere around you on a sign, and as people go by, they can kick you or throw things at you or spit on you or say nasty things. And the idea is this is part of your punishment. It deals with shame rather than guilt, public rather than private. And it's something that's more in harmony with Eastern approaches to law and guilt and self-control than Western. And we'll talk about that. Calvin's Geneva ends up failing because ultimately the people cannot exist under that kind of totalitarian rule. But Calvinism does spread to Holland, to Scotland, to English Puritans, and to the French Huguenots. And we'll leave it there until tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Come again. Oh. And thank you for your extensive participation. You too. Sienna,
Yeah.
if you need help settling back in, just check in with me during the study lab.
Okay, I turned in my quiz track sheet that I was going to turn in.
Excellent. Good.
Thank you.
You too. Take care. See you later, Video Rangers.